Live from the slightly twisted deck bar, it's the Poojie Podcast with Justin Lemine.
The Poojie Podcast is proudly sponsored by Cimarron Golf Club, located in Jacksonville, Florida, off County Road 210, just west of St. John's Parkway.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Poojie Podcast. A very exciting episode today, as we did before the NFL draft. Had the panel on to discuss some pre-draft thoughts and recap the 2019 season. Well, here we are to now recap the 2020 draft. It was a long 3 days, but I know a lot of us were looking forward to it with no sports being on elsewhere. So lots to talk about. I'm sure a lot of articles coming out already kind of analyzing the picks in the drafts, but we're just going to take a look deeper into some of these players. And if you're not familiar with some of them, hopefully we can give you some good insight as to who we picked. So I guess kind of starting it off, obviously we had 2 picks in the first round, thanks to the Rams with the 20th overall pick. But we'll start with the 9th overall pick in the draft. So Jacob Yurtical, if you want to jump in with me real quick and tell me a little bit about C.J. Henderson, the cornerback out of Florida.
Yeah, for sure. So C.J. Henderson was the 9th pick at the Jaguars took in the first round. He's a 6'1", 204-pound corner. He ran a 4.39 40 at the combine. He also put up 20 reps on the bench press. So this guy's got the size, the speed, and the strength you kind of want to see out of your first, your top corner. He has the speed to keep up with those faster, smaller guys, but the big body and the strength to keep up with those bigger bodies at the NFL level. Something that he does very well, obviously, as a corner is coverage. That was what he kind of rivaled Jeff Okudah in. It was honestly between those two, and then it was a drop-off from there. So, he's very good in coverage. He gets his head around. He's very fluid with his hips. He keeps up with receivers and just does a great job getting his head around to make a play. He had 11 pass defenses on the ball last year. He had 0 picks, but I think that's because a lot of people didn't really throw his way by his junior year. Something he can improve on is his tackling. He's an inconsistent tackler, but that doesn't mean he's a bad tackler. While he did have some whiffs, maybe could improve on his open field tackling. There's plenty of plays where he makes some good stops in the backfield, as well as some stops on breakaway touchdowns. You know, he saved a touchdown against Tennessee that ended up turning into a touchback for his team because he actually forced the ball out. So overall, we're getting a guy that has the potential to be a top corner. He's going to be a day one starter for us, and I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jeff Okudah there, obviously stole a lot of the spotlight when it came down to that position in the draft. Ended up going number 3 overall. So we'll see if he works out. But the Jaguars did end up getting C.J. Henderson, and some reports came out shortly after the draft that Henderson was one of the 4 players that the Jaguars wanted at number 9. So the Jaguars obviously targeted that 9th pick and cornerback as a large position of need and ended up getting their guy, as some would say. Others maybe weren't so hot about the pick, just simply maybe based on the reputation not being there. Jeff Okudah's spotlight was very bright going into the draft. But we did mention the 2 first-round picks, and we'll stay in the SEC, and we will have Kyle Verban join us to tell us a little bit about the 20th overall pick, K'Lavon Chaisson.
K'Lavon Chaisson out of LSU. So everyone's kind of heard about the number 7 jersey being for the most talented player on the team, Odell Beckham, Tyrann Mathieu wearing that jersey. So a lot of people know that the number 18 jersey is actually reserved for the hard worker with the selfless attitude on and off the field. So something just awesome about him as a person, not even getting into the football side of it yet. So always great to see that when a guy that you're drafting that high in the draft also has the character to back it up. So in 2019, 13 games played, 60 tackles, 13.5 for lost yardage, 6.5 sacks. As a linebacker, edge rusher, those are some great stats playing against some of the best competition in the SEC. Ended up being first team all SEC. Ended up having actually a knee injury a couple years back. Didn't slow him down at all. He came back. Honestly, just looks like a freak athlete. The one thing that he said himself is that he's been kind of relying on raw ability at this point. He hasn't really honed his technique. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to seeing at this next level with, our coaches coming in and being able to mold him and have some of those veteran guys, teach him in the offseason here. Because I really think that he's really only scratched the surface of what he can do. And just from the value of that pick, I think that he's definitely going to be a great player going forward for us. So.
Yeah, and K'Lavon Chaisson was actually one of those 4 players that Caldwell mentioned as one of the players they wanted at number 9. So for them to be able to get him at 20, obviously he didn't slide into the second round, which no one expected, but Jaguars still able to get what they deemed to be a top 10 talent in the first round, which is great. And you mentioned his athleticism. I think his athleticism got overshadowed quite a bit by the fact that Isaiah Simmons was in this draft. Mm-hmm. And when you look at a guy like K'Lavon Chaisson, a lot of similar technique and talent as Isaiah Simmons, maybe a lower platform just simply based on Isaiah Simmons' spotlight, like we mentioned also with Jeff Okudah. But I think what he's going to do is he'll come in here and he'll kind of help us implement a few more schemes that might help shore up the run game a little bit, which Jacksonville definitely needs. One of the worst in run defense in 2019. So we'll have to see what we can get out of him, but definitely exciting. But then we went to the offensive side of the ball, which was something that Jaguar fans wanted to see early in this draft. And in the second round, first pick for the Jaguars in the second round, 42nd overall, Jaguars take Laviska Shenault Jr. out of Colorado. So, Luke, if you want to jump in real quick and tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah, so in the second round, we ended up taking Laviska Shenault. And the cool thing about him was that in 2018, he was actually a 1,000-plus yard receiver. So you love seeing that when a guy can produce as well as that. In 2019, he was hampered down a little bit from a few injuries. It says on the report he should be fully cleared by the time May comes around. And so he should be okay to play if rookie camp even happens for us. But he looks like a big play waiting to happen and just an offensive weapon all around. If you watch any of the tape, he's been used as a wildcat. They use some screens and they just let him run loose. If you get that receiver the ball, Laviska can run people over, and even in a clip I saw, he did run over a linebacker. So if we can get him the ball, it's a big play waiting to happen. And he said once in a quote that he feels like he's three receivers that he wants to idolize and play like, and those three receivers were Jarvis Landry for the dog mentality, Julio Jones for the physical aspect, and then Larry Fitzgerald for his on the field, just known as a professional and get work done. And if he can be like any one of those guys, I think we hit a home run there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that last part because we looked at C.J. Henderson, K'Lavon Chaisson, and now Shenault. And it looks like with those first three picks, character was a big factor in what they were looking for. Maybe not the most, but that was a big factor they may have been looking at. And it's good to have someone like him come in. And something I do like about him as well, I do think that he's a versatile receiver, can play across the field. In the slot, he can play outside, short route runner. He can go deep as well. So a little bit of everything there. And we saw Minshew kind of excel with him or with players similar to him at Washington State. So it'll be exciting. Probably my most exciting pick I've seen in the draft, just as far as what the potential could be, because it is such a big position of need. You mentioned his size, 6'1", 227, puts him at the heaviest receiver on the roster. So that's something that we haven't had in quite some time. So definitely looking forward to seeing what he can do. And then we did actually transfer back to the defensive side of the ball. So we will go back to Kyle, bringing him back in to tell us a little bit about the nose tackle, the big ugly up front, Devon Hamilton.
Oh, yeah. Well, Devon Hamilton coming out of The Ohio State University. So I was already excited going into it, but I tried to put my bias aside there and go into the facts on that. It was a guy that struggled with the depth that Ohio State had over his first couple of years there. Obviously, with guys like the Bosa brothers and Chase Young this year kind of coming out, they're really going to overshadow him when it comes to the headlines there. But this past season, 28 tackles, 18 solo, 9.5 tackles per loss, and 6 sacks. So absolutely unbelievable production. You want to talk about size. 6'4", 320. I think that he's going to have no problem plugging that hole. And then if there's any question about strength, he actually had the most bench press reps of all defensive linemen at the combine. So you want to talk about just, raw talent, strength, and ability. I'm hoping that, again, he's one of those guys we can just plug and play. And especially with Darius and, some of the other guys we lost in the defensive line, he's going to be crucial in stopping the run, which has really been a problem for us, in the past season. So.
Yeah, and Jacob mentioned in the pre-draft, we brought in someone like Al Woods, but, Hamilton is a guy that's going to be able to complement that position pretty well and help shore up the run game. And you mentioned the 6 sacks at Ohio State last season, only behind second overall pick Chase Young, something that went unnoticed, probably because of that crowd at defensive line. Not very often do you see a 6'4", 320-pound defensive nose tackle get to the quarterback 6 times in a season. They're pretty much there as a role player for run defense, and we'll see if he can bring that to Jacksonville as well, and probably earn some playing time with some of that ability in the pass game as well. And then we do have offensive tackle Ben Barch. This was a very interesting pick for the Jaguars. He comes out of St. John's in Minnesota, not St. John's here in North Florida, but he actually started his offensive, career at St. John's in Minnesota at tight end. He was a 250-pound tight end, lined up a lot next to the running back. This was a guy that was a Division III player. Not many of these guys do get drafted in the 4th round, so they must have saw something here that they really liked a lot. But he's likely to just maybe start inside, kind of at the guard position, just to kind of develop a little bit. It'll be he'll be hard pressed, I think, to find some reps on the offensive line to begin with. But a guy that played a lot in college, went to the Senior Bowl actually, which is always kind of a good accolade to have. And then I think one of the best things about him is he has a unique smoothie recipe that a lot of people like to talk about, to put on some of those pounds. He put on 59 pounds while at college to kind of move to that offensive tackle position, and his nickname is the Smoothie King. So it'll be fun to kind of watch him and pull for him. A guy like that from a Division III school is always someone that you want to root for. So guess transferring back to the defensive side of the ball, we'll jump over to Jacob again with the 137th overall pick in the 4th round. We got a cornerback out of Michigan State. Tell me a little bit about him, Jacob.
The guy was Josiah Scott that we drafted, cornerback from Michigan State, like you said. This guy's a little bit smaller of a cornerback. He's 5'9", 185 pounds. So he's probably going to be someone we hope to see develop more as a nickel corner. We obviously already have DJ Hayden, but he won't be around forever. So this guy, I watched some highlights of him today. He actually has some pretty good ball skills and coverage skills. He was always around the ball. He's not going to be like a lockdown guy. He doesn't have the size for that, but he does have very good speed, a 4.42 40 at the combine. So I saw great coverage skills. He seems to have good tackling instincts, which I like. The problem is with his frame, sometimes I saw him get a little overpowered, like getting blocked by receivers. So while he might have had the good instincts, if he gets overpowered, there's not much he's going to be able to do. But overall, I think it's a good depth piece that can hopefully develop into a nickel guy. I think, DJ Hayden's like 5'11", 190. Aaron Colvin was about 5'11", 190. So it's not like you need a huge guy there. But he's definitely not going to be your outside receiver or your outside corner, but more so a strong nickel probably in the future.
Yeah, and DJ Hayden is actually entering the last year of his 3-year contract right now. So obviously a piece that the Jaguars wanted to get in here to maybe start developing behind what we have seen as one of the best nickel cornerbacks in the NFL of recent. So DJ Hayden has kind of flown under the radar a lot, but hopefully this Josiah Scott corner out of Michigan State can help a little bit. And let's stay on the defensive side of the ball, which seems to be pretty much the pattern here. But let's go over to Kyle Verban to tell us a little bit about Shaq Quarterman, the inside linebacker out of Miami.
Yeah, out of the U. So I had to do some research on him because I didn't really know too much and watch too many Miami games this year. But actually coming into college had offers from Alabama, Florida, Clemson, and Georgia. So kind of had the pick of all the top teams. I don't think a lot of people knew that. But viewed as a leader both in high school and in college. And something that's absolutely incredible is he's a 4-year starter, played all 52 games for Miami. The only player in Miami history to ever do that. So you want to talk about, for in the linebacker position, of just toughness and just the ability to stay on the field. That's awesome just for, our depth going forward. He had 356 tackles, 46.5 for loss, 13 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and an interception. And then this past season, 15.5 tackles for loss, which was the 3rd straight year of at least 10 tackles for loss. So the guy's just been productive the entire time he was here. I'm actually super surprised he even fell all the way into the 4th round with all the stats and accolades and praise that he's gotten from his teammates. And it seems like every single person that knows about him has nothing but praise to say about him. Top it all off that he's a Jacksonville native. I just think that picks a home run for us, depth-wise, regardless of whether he starts right away. This is a guy that wants to be here. He said that when he saw that 904 area code on that phone number that he started almost crying immediately and just was so excited to be here. So, I think it's just a home run pick from Caldwell and the guys just to bring someone like that in. So definitely excited to see what he can do.
Yeah, this is a really exciting pick, and a lot of times in the fourth round, you don't necessarily get someone like you mentioned with those type of accolades, but 52 consecutive starts, like you mentioned, most in Miami history, which they have a very storied history. So to kind of have that title is huge. And then you mentioned the tackles, 356, ninth all time in Miami history. So Jacksonville has struggled quite a bit recently with keeping linebackers on the field. A lot of those guys that we had on the roster for special teams needs ended up actually playing quite a bit in the past few seasons. So I think for any Jaguar fan, it's very exciting to see him come in and be able to, learn under Joe Schobert, the guy we got from Cleveland. So it'll be a good guy to learn under and probably earn some playing time as well, simply just based off the fact that our linebacker room is not too crowded and our defensive schemes are all over the board. So there's going to be opportunities.
He's honestly just –
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah. Oop, sorry, froze for me on the screen.
No, you're good.
What were you saying?
No, he's a guy that's going to come in and obviously compete day one to get on the field. So it'll be exciting to see what he's able to do. But a lot of good accolades coming into Jacksonville, and like you mentioned, from Jacksonville over there in Orange Park and Oakleaf. So that'll be exciting.
Honestly, just mark my words right now. I think that he's going to be a leader for our team in around 3 years' time. I think that he's going to be the guy, at linebacker for us. So,
I saw something exciting, an analysis, kind of not necessarily comparing him to Ray Lewis, but someone just mentioning, Ray Lewis is from Miami, kind of had the same personality as far as just being a leader and a good locker room presence. So we'll see if Shaq Quarterman can do that as well. And staying on the defensive side of the ball, again, another defensive back, safety out of Auburn, Daniel Thomas, the first pick in the fifth round for us. Just a really good depth piece for us. Obviously, we do have a young secondary with the departures of Ramsey and Boye, but at the safety position, he'll line up behind Ronnie Harrison initially, and he'll actually maybe get some playing time there as well. I would say most of his playing time would come, barring injuries, in the safety position, but played at Auburn, started 2 years, high level, collegiate talent, I guess, in the SEC, of course. So has a lot of good experience playing against a lot of talented players. And he'll be someone that can kind of groom nicely underneath Ronnie Harrison, kind of keep that SEC safety chemistry back there with the two of them. So we'll move it back over to the offensive side of the ball with a massive, massive receiver out of Texas, Colin Johnson. So, Luke, can you tell me a little bit about Colin?
Yeah, Colin Johnson, you speak about the size, and he's actually 6'6", so he's quite a tall receiver, and he doesn't really get any much separation. His speed hasn't been shown too well. Generally, a faster corner can reduce the gap if there is any. But as a red zone target, it is a sight to see whenever a guy that's 6'6" can just go up there and jump up and get the ball. So I think he won't be playing too much from down on our own side of the field, but once we get into those 20 yards into the end zone, I think he'll come out, and we have some packages for him for that.
Yeah, I think red zone is going to be this guy's specialty. Anytime you have someone that's 6'6" and playing receiver as opposed to tight end, means that he's got some athleticism, can really go up and get the ball. But anytime you have a guy with size like this, it's going to be exciting to see what he can become, and if he can kind of hone in that height to becoming an actual, threat on the field and in the offense. So it'll be exciting to see what he can do. In Texas, a nice school to have a receiver come out of. Kind of surprised this guy was in the fifth round, but you did mention those issues with separation, but hopefully he can make up for that on the go up and get it body type balls. So sticking with height and sticking on the offensive side of the ball, an interesting little note here with the first pick in the sixth round. The Jaguars drafted quarterback out of Oregon State, Jake Luton, and another sixth-round quarterback for the Jags. Fourth time in the last 5 years that's happened, so obviously beginning to see a trend there. I don't necessarily see this as a pick to threaten the current quarterback room. Obviously just something that's going to maybe help with the depth at the position. So something good, maybe, bring him into camp and see what he can do. But again, with that type of size, even at the quarterback position, going to be exciting what he can do. Similar to Gardner Minshew, a few cool facts, though. He actually played at 3 different colleges throughout his collegiate career, 5 years in total. Last 3 coming at Oregon State, like I mentioned, and really just takes care of the ball extremely well. Combined in his last 2 seasons, you're looking at 38 touchdowns and only 7 interceptions. So anytime you can have that kind of protection, you're going to be, looking pretty solid. And come in to compete for quarterback 2. Who knows with Josh Dobbs, what's going on there. But it'll be exciting to see what he can do. And again, another offensive weapon with the second pick in the 6th round. We have a tight end out of Georgia Tech, Tyler Davis. So tell us about Tyler Davis, Jacob or Luke.
Yeah, Tyler Davis out of Georgia Tech. He's an interesting pick. I think he's one of those 6th round flyers that we took. In our tight end room, we have Eifert, O'Shaughnessy, and Oliver. All 3 of those guys can go catch balls. I think this guy coming out of Georgia Tech, they run a triple option. They like to run the ball a lot. So you might see him more as a blocking tight end than anything else, because we have better options when it comes to pass catching from the tight end spot. But it sounds like he's going to come in here and try and make the roster. I don't know if we're going to take 4 tight ends. We might, but he's definitely going to give it his best, and we might see him in there to go jumbo and just push the rock into the end zone.
Yeah, really not too much to expect out of this pick. Like you mentioned, just kind of a 6th round flyer. Actually started his collegiate career at UConn and finished with his last season at Georgia Tech. So was his 1 year, I guess, within the ACC at Georgia Tech. Not too much production there, but I do think one of the biggest things with him right now is he's coming in simply because our tight ends have been plagued with injuries over the last few years. Doesn't seem like we've had a reliable tight end similar to linebackers for the last 2 or 3 years. We do get Eifert in, which Jacob mentioned. He did play his first full season last year, so it'll be nice to see if he can continue that. But then you do have Oliver, who missed a lot of time last year with hamstring and back injuries. And James O'Shaughnessy missed 11 games last year coming off a torn ACL. So it might be the perfect scenario for Tyler Davis to maybe pick up some playing time just simply based on the injuries surrounding the position. And then finally, to cap us off with the 12th pick, our final pick in the draft, in the 7th round, 223 overall, cornerback out of Memphis, Chris Claybrooks. Jacob, tell me about him.
So the interesting thing I found out about Chris Claybrooks is I didn't know who he was. So when I Google him, I find out that depending on the website you find, he's either 5'9" or 6 foot. I don't know which one it is, but I'm sure we'll find out once he comes into town for us. 177 pounds. He's not a big guy, but what I found out listening to Dave Caldwell's post-draft presser is that he's basically being brought in as a kick returner. He's not really going to be focused on heavily being an actual, depth piece at corner. More so going to be a kick returner and special teamer. He had 11 kick returns, averaged 30 yards per kick return. He had a big touchdown against Cincy in their season finale that helped them get the bid to be the home team in the AAC championship. So that's what we're looking to see at Chris Claybrooks.
Yeah, and the Jaguars have lacked a reliable returner for quite some time. We've seen issues in the special teams game for a while at returner. It's kind of one of those pieces that a lot of people forget about, but then realize how important it is the second that something goes wrong. So the fact that we're out here drafting a player specifically for that position says kind of what Dave Caldwell thinks about that position, and we'll see what he can do. Again, special teams player, but that's what he does. So we'll see what he's able to do. I think I actually read that he started as a wide receiver at Memphis as well. So not only that, but in the return game, it is necessary to have hands, and being a receiver, hopefully that helps a little bit. So just an interesting note there. And then the last player I want to talk about before we do go to open forum, just to hear your thoughts, is an undrafted middle linebacker out of UCF. Obviously, you can see the flag here behind me, so I do want to mention him. Nate Evans, nicknamed the Bulldog at UCF. 48 games in total at UCF, but because of the crowded linebacking core, only started his senior year. But with that being said, averaged over 100 tackles in his last 2 seasons. And in 2019, the 112 tackles he had was top the conference. Earned him an all-conference second team in 2019 and was also the team captain, which is another great, sign of character in locker room presence. So he's a well-conditioned athlete as well. As a lot of people know, UCF runs a very quick offense, so their defense spends a lot of time on the field when the other team has the ball. So has a pretty well-conditioned, mentality. So he's ready to kind of get out there and start flying around. 6'1". Maybe not the fastest guy, but he's definitely coming in at a position that, like we mentioned briefly ago, the Jaguars have had issues with reliability and dependability. So him and Shaq Quarterman, we'll see what they can do. It'll be definitely interesting to kind of see what they're able to do in camp, and especially Nate Evans, see if he can potentially find his way onto the roster for the Jaguars. So I do want to open this up real quick to everyone, open forum. If you want to start with Nate Evans, or if you have any other undrafted free agents you want to talk about, go for it. But here we are, so go for it.
Cool. I was just gonna pitch in on that Nate Evans thing, because obviously we're all UCF fans, but honestly, I don't know if I've seen like another player like him. And we've had a lot of great linebackers at UCF. We've had the privilege of watching Terrence Plummer and Shaquem Griffin and him this past year, and he just has a nose for the ball. Like I think that you basically see his number or his name called on almost every single defensive play. Like he was getting in there, and that over 100 tackles per season, definitely tells you the picture there. I think that this is a guy that just because he plays for UCF and because of the fact that he didn't really get to start too much till his senior season, that definitely hurt him. And with the lack of, a real official pro day, combine, stuff like that, his draft stock kind of left him, out in the open there. So I'm really glad that we picked him up, even if it's just a depth piece. I think that he could still contribute whenever he gets onto the field. So especially with the talent that we brought in at linebacker, all those guys are going to feed off each other, and they're all high character, high energy, high production type of guys. So I'm just excited to see all those guys come together.
Yeah, Nate Evans is the type of guy where if it's a football cliche, it fits him. High motor, that's Nate Evans. Nose for the ball, Nate Evans. Dependable, Nate Evans. Every football cliche that you're going to hear on the defensive side of the ball, swarm tackler, around the ball, like we mentioned, like it's going to be Nate Evans. Like that's what it is. And I'm glad you mentioned the off-season workouts kind of getting canceled, because when I talked to Austin Lane a few weeks ago, he was obviously a guy out of Murray State. He mentioned how important those off-season workouts are for those smaller school guys. And obviously UCF has some recognition on a national scale, but as far as the play goes, he did only start 1 year, and that's going to affect where you get drafted simply just based off production standpoint. So excited to have him in, and we'll see what he can do.
I think
we also did stick to the SEC and picked up undrafted free agent safety out of Georgia, J.R. Reed. So it looks like we are sticking to the SEC in the safety spot. Georgia's been a good defensive team, and they've been in the winning side of the SEC East for a while. So it's nice seeing us pick up a guy from Georgia and trying to stick into the safety spot.
Yeah, what I was about to say is I think that, obviously Justin was kind of mentioning how a lot of our picks ended up being defensive picks. They're really trying to retool that defense. I'm really excited, though, to see between Laviska Shenault and Colin Johnson coming in, how our weapons for Minshew are going to evolve, because obviously DJ Chark has been a Pro Bowl receiver for us last year. We have Dede and Conley. But now we have a few different types of receivers. We have DJ Chark, who can hopefully be that number one going forward. We have Colin Johnson, the 6'6" guy that, like you said, is going to be a red zone threat, a possession receiver if we need those big first downs. But Viska, I'm really excited about him because he seems like a guy that you can throw a slant, you can throw a screen, you could throw anything, and he's going to get the ball, and he's going to find a way to get yards after the catch, a la Justin Blackman, who I know didn't pan out too well, but it reminded me of him a little bit in terms of his yak ability. And I'm excited to see how we really actually did help grow Minshew's weapons more than people might have thought.
Well, Jacob, something to add on to that we haven't really even spoken about is something that Shenault does that we haven't really seen in a while is the Wildcat and taking direct snaps. Like, we haven't had a guy like that since Denard Robinson, and he really wasn't able to be in a great position to help us out long term. But I think that we could get really creative with it, like you said, and just open it up, let him do sweeps across, just throw up those balls for Colin Johnson. There's so many options now that we're opening ourselves up to. So it's definitely going to be cool to see.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things about Shenault, and I had said this the other day, is it seemed like how Luke mentioned that the wide receiver group was just so deep this year. Seemed like Shenault had all the abilities in the world to be a first-round pick almost any other year. Like, very rarely would you see this type of talent fall into the second round. Obviously, the core muscle surgery that he had recently kind of helped make him fall a little bit. But I do think, and I'd be curious to see what the Jaguars maybe big board looked like. But to see where they had Shenault ranked as far as wide receiver went, because he does kind of fit the mold as a Jacksonville receiver, someone that we don't have yet, at least when it comes to style of play. But, Jacob, I know you mentioned something to me about Shenault the other day that you thought was pretty interesting, something after his 2018 season, something along those lines. What was that again that you had mentioned?
Yeah, so you were discussing his injuries that he kind of dealt with this year that kind of hampered his season, as Luke also said. But according to Dave Caldwell, I don't remember if it was the post-draft or if it was just the post-round 2 and 3 press conference he did. He actually said Shenault was their number 1 rated receiver at the end of 2018. Like, all the scouts from the Jaguars, they looked at him and thought of him as the top guy at that time. So the fact that the next year we can kind of be fortunate that through some injury, which is obviously not great for him, we kind of hit a home run, hopefully, in the second round, landing a first round, draft pick essentially. This guy's first round talent for sure. And this is another year where the Jags, make it like a round 2 guy that should be a first round guy, and he's going to come in and produce right away for us.
Well, and one of the analysts even said we might have just gotten one of the best athletes overall in the draft with that pick. I mean, like you said, the injuries were the only thing that really kept him from having that status. Like, yeah, he really dominated, every game, and the teams had to scheme against him when they were playing. Like, I remember just watching those highlights, the 9 minutes of highlights that they had from all of his plays. It's unbelievable what he's able to do and take over a game by himself. So,
and I know a lot of people are going to put letter grades on a lot of these picks. That's just not something I'm a huge fan of, simply because it's not every day that those picks translate to the NFL as far as the talent goes. I think more so the letter grades could be as far as the value goes for the positions of need. And I think the Jaguars did a really good job of collecting talent at a lot of positions of needs. We saw a lot of cornerbacks get drafted, obviously some more for special teams. Then we saw 2 receivers get drafted. We saw a defensive lineman get drafted, but not just a defensive tackle, like a specific nose tackle meant to come in to help with the run. We saw Kayvon Chason get drafted, obviously a first-round pick, but there's uncertainty surrounding Yannick Ngakoue right now. You bring in a guy like Chason who could fill that role almost identical to Yannick Ngakoue, maybe not as purebred of a defensive end, but more so of just a speed guy on the end to pair with Josh Allen. So I think when it comes down to it, this being I guess one of the first off seasons in a while that Dave Caldwell has had the reins as GM since Tom Coughlin departed. It's kind of nice to see him get back to making these types of picks. And another funny thing to note is our previous GM, Gene Smith, had a very big reputation for drafting a lot of small guys, or small school guys, I should say, trying to find those diamonds in the rough. It doesn't really seem like Dave Caldwell cares to do that. He wants to go out and get the guys that played at the best colleges, knowing that there's a reason they were at those colleges. So you saw guys out of the SEC flying off the board for Jacksonville. You saw a few guys out of the Big Ten coming off the board for Jacksonville, and then obviously the ACC as well. So definitely kind of solidifying a stance that, hey, we're going to go out and get the guys that we know are playing at a top level in college and hope that translates to the NFL level.
Seeing Jonathan Taylor in the background brings up a point that I think the Jags didn't take a running back this year, and we were shopping Fournette is what I've heard. And the fact that we didn't take a running back this year, I don't even know if we're going to run the offense through him anymore or just let Minshew air it out with Jay Gruden. He says, I have 2 new weapons. I want to go use them, and let's just air it out. And I think that'll be more fun for fans, and let Minshew do Minshew.
I did hear a good soundbite from Dave Caldwell regarding that, because obviously we were shopping him, but they were talking about that, and it seemed that once they got to a certain point in the draft, he kind of said they didn't feel any of the guys later on in the draft were going to be capable of beating out Rock Armstead as well as Devine Ezigbo, who are our current backups. So I think that's why once we got to the later rounds, we kind of avoided picking any running backs at that point.
But and then still, even on that note, it's interesting. Oh, and here's Shenault behind me right now. Right there. Our boy, Visca. So it's interesting you say that, though, Jacob, because we saw on draft day Matt Breida get traded to the Dolphins. And with 12 picks, we were almost certain that 12 players were not going to get drafted. I mean, Luke even said there's no way. And I mean, I'm still shocked. Like, I'm still waiting for the trade alert to come in on the bottom of the screen, and this is 3 days old. So it's interesting because you would have thought that maybe they would have tried to move some pieces. And I know Miami actually was rumored to maybe have had talks with Jacksonville about Fournette and some different things there. But I'm very, very curious as to, the thoughts at running back. Luke brings up a great point there, because if Fournette is already being shopped and potentially doesn't necessarily want to be here, which I don't want to paint that rumor, but if that is the case, and we went out and got Chase on because of all the rumors kind of swirling about with Yannick, then what was the deal with the running back situation, and what is the plan more so? Now that the draft is over, is there a plan to try and get a running back from someone? A lot of NFL teams nowadays run a dual running back system, and running backs aren't just floating on free agency anymore. All the good running backs are on teams. So I'm really curious as to what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone have anything else they want to mention before we sign off here? I know we're kind of coming up against it, but any predictions moving forward? How much better did this draft make the Jaguars as far as win-loss projections? Did we get better? Did we get good enough to maybe not be a bottom dweller in the AFC South?
So at least for me right now, I think the defense is going to need a little bit of time to adjust with the pieces that we have, but I think that they were positive pieces added. I think the offense upgrades immediately with the wide receivers and the linemen and tight end that we're adding. I think that they can come in and pretty much contribute immediately. So I'm hoping that we'll see, at least on that side of the ball, a good uptick on that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Kyle that I think the defense is going to be pretty solid compared to what people might think, because we did get a lot of free agent guys on the defensive line. So they're going to come in and really help keep that rotation fresh along with our draft picks. I think CJ Henderson will start day one, and, we have some guys at linebacker now that are going to keep things, set well in the run game. So I think overall our team has a good shot to surprise people.
Cool.